Bloodline, El Salvador, Chapter 6. Juan Carlos brought up Manuel's contact with the rebel leader several times over the next few nights. Manuel didn't relish the idea of jumping back into the Salvadoran frying pan, but he felt that he owed Juan Carlos a great debt in helping him get on his feet in Acapulco. Juan Carlos became animated as he told Manuel about the many connections his organization had to smuggle coca from Colombia through Panama. As I have told you before, La Milicia Panameña keeps la coca flowing in from Colombia. Ironically, we have quite a few Americans in Costa Rica supposedly working for drug enforcement agencies who keep the supply coming into that country. Unfortunately, no one enjoys crossing the border into El Salvador. We're in business to make money, not to get caught in the crossfire of some asinine civil war. Then the salesman would come out and Juan Carlos, Manuel, if you could only visualize the incredible wealth that goes with distributing the powder, he would say excitedly as he tugged on Manuel's shirt sleeve. No more worrying about money, no more poverty. You feel like a man when you no longer have to grovel for a few pesos to live like a rat. You can take a wife, raise a family the right way. I know the money's there, but the risk, Juan Carlos, that is what makes me hesitate. I deserted the army, hombre, and made off with the commanding officer's favorite pistol. They catch me, I'm dead. It's as simple as that. The Salvadoran army answers to nobody. There will be no trial, no jail time, only a bullet in the head and maybe a shallow grave. Unless, of course, they decide to let the animals feast on my carcass. Juan Carlos put out his hand in a gesture of compromise. I tell you what, my friend, I feel that I'm coming on too strong. I am well aware of the risk that you'll be taking, and I would hate the thought of you losing your life over some white powder. You sleep on it for a few nights. I can promise you this, however. If you can pull this off, I guarantee that you will be financially set to move to America, or any other country for that matter. Manuel agreed to seriously consider Juan Carlos's proposition. He began to have a seed of doubt that Juan Carlos was just a small-time coca peddler to American tourists, as he claimed. Having high enough connections with La Milicia Panameña to smuggle coca from Colombia sounded to Manuel like Juan Carlos was in the business pretty deep. He weighed his chances of pulling the deal off in his mind. Manuel barely knew the rebel leader, but it was true that the rebels were always scrambling for money to buy arms. The big if would be getting to the eastern part of El Salvador in one piece and making the connection with the rebel. Manuel didn't even know where the hell the man might be after all these months. He may easily be dead. However, as Juan Carlos had suggested, Manuel could always strike a deal with another rebel. Anything was possible. Just when Manuel began to talk himself out of the deal, he recalled that just a few months ago he had never experienced indoor plumbing or electricity. When he came to Acapulco, he had only the clothes on his back and a few $100s left from the sale of his army-issued rifle. Juan Carlos had turned his life around. Whatever the outcome may be, Manuel felt compelled to give it his best shot for Juan Carlos. 3 weeks later, a very nervous Manuel found himself in the window seat of an aging Boeing 707 jet readying for takeoff to El Salvador. Juan Carlos had made sure that Manuel was well funded for his new vocation in international smuggling. Manuel had a plan of action upon his arrival at the airport outside of San Salvador. Manuel was posing as a news correspondent for a Mexican newspaper. Manuel and his forged papers, complete with official press identification badge, had no problem with customs at the airport. The crisp American $20 bill folded neatly into the Mexican passport also helped ease Manuel's entry into his estranged motherland. Manuel wasted no time at the airport. He chose a cab driver with the cleanest car and struck a deal for both the car and the chauffeur to drive him into the countryside. The deal was not cheap even by American standards. Still, Manuel was amazed that anyone would be crazy enough to drive to the Honduras border at any price. The driver warned Manuel that both the army and the rebels had roadblocks and checkpoints at various places on the roads. According to the driver, neither the army nor the rebels were particularly civilized. This Manuel already knew. They successfully talked their way through several army checkpoints using Manuel's reporter cover. Manuel was just beginning to feel confident when his luck ran out. As they neared the Honduras border, they were stopped by an army roadblock. Manuel's heart sank as a swaggering officer in knee-high jackboots carefully peered into each vehicle as he made his way slowly toward the cab. Manuel recognized Captain Rodriguez instantly, even from a distance. "Oh, shit," he said under his breath. The captain finally made his way to the taxi and peered inside. "May I see your paper?" "Why, you son of a bitch!" The captain also had a keen recollection of Manuel. The furious officer reached through the open window and dragged Manuel out of the window by his hair. Manuel ended up on his hands and knees, peering up at Captain Rodriguez. Since he knew he was going to die anyway, Manuel couldn't resist remarking, "I much preferred your stainless steel .45 over that plain old blue one that you have now, Captain." With an enraged roar, the captain drew his pistol. Manuel felt a dull thud on his temple, then blackness. Manuel woke up lying face down in the dirt. He felt an overwhelming wave of searing heat and struggled to turn over. His head pounded and his crotch felt sticky wet. As if the situation wasn't bad enough, Manuel had obviously soiled himself. The heat and the stench rose up into his throat, and he turned his head to the side and vomited. When he finally recovered enough, he looked up into the blinding sunlight at a rusting iron grating no more than 3 feet above his nose. With a start of panic, he looked desperately from side to side and realized that he had been thrown into an earthen pit little bigger than a coffin and imprisoned by the sheet of heavy iron grating thrown over the top of the pit. Just as the sun was going down and the heat became bearable, a group of soldiers surrounded the pit, staring down at him. The iron grating was lifted, and Manuel was unceremoniously hauled out of the pit. He was too weak and sick to struggle and was dragged to an adobe hut with 3 small rooms inside. The soldiers tied him upright to a wooden chair and stepped back as the captain strode into the room. The captain didn't break stride as he approached Manuel with a stinging backhand across his mouth. He peered at Manuel with evil black eyes. "So what brings the thieving traitor back to El Salvador, Mr. Mexican news reporter?" Suddenly the captain screamed in fury. "I asked you why you came back, whore!" and punctuated his last sentence with a fist to Manuel's temple. Manuel toppled over in his attached chair and blacked out for a few seconds. He was roughly placed upright by the soldiers. A uniformed American wearing a green beret walked quietly into the room and stood next to the captain. Manuel recognized the uniform of the American advisors who had trained his company to fight communists. "I don't mean to butt in, Captain, but there are more effective ways to get information out of a man without busting up your knuckles." The captain looked sheepishly from his bleeding right hand to the American. "I'm sure you can teach me some good tricks, but in this situation, the pain is worth it. The fuck deserted his country and now is stupid enough to come back. Why?" "Exactly. Why? That information is what I'm going to show you how to obtain, so long as you don't kill the poor bastard first." The American held up a syringe. "True serum, Captain. The scientists call it sodium pentothal, but we don't care about names, only truth." The captain looked at the needle with interest. He directed his attention back to Manuel. "Ha-ha, whore! Here is your chance to serve your country as an experiment. What do you think of that?" Manuel spat a bloody wad into the captain's face. With a roar of indignation, the captain was all over Manuel, pounding his head with both fists until the American grabbed the captain in a bear hug and managed to pull him away. "For Christ's sakes, Captain, cool off! How the hell do you expect the prisoner to spill his guts out with a swollen face?" Captain Rodriguez was shaking in rage, but he pulled himself together. Okay. Where do we give him the shot? In the eyeball?" The American shook his head in disgust. "Let me handle it, all right, Captain?" The interrogation became a blur to Manuel, and he didn't remember passing out, but he came to looking up at a white ceiling. With a shock, he realized that he was lying in a king-size bed between white sheets. He could barely see through his swollen eyelids, but he could just make out Captain Rodriguez peering into the room. "How are we feeling this morning? I trust the accommodations are adequate, no?" The captain was a virtual fountain of diplomacy and goodwill. Manuel managed to mumble between swollen lips. "What the hell is going on here, Captain?" "We had a very interesting, in-depth conversation last night, my friend. The Americans are such wizards with technology, don't you think? At any rate, to address your mission, your rebel friend was unfortunately killed in a firefight several months ago. I hope that you aren't too terribly disappointed, but I doubt that you were all that close to him. Besides, your friend Juan Carlos's plan was, at best, a wild shot in the dark. You and I both know that, but I now understand your sense of loyalty to your friend." The captain began pacing the room. "However, the concept is a good one. An armed network smuggling coca from Panama to Costa Rica, El Salvador, and Guatemala into Mexico. He mused. He turned and faced Manuel, his beady black eyes glinting under the artificial lighting of the room. "The money involved is most impressive, most impressive. For a peasant laborer, you have come a long ways, my friend. These are lofty goals you have endeavored to accomplish. However, why entrust such a lucrative operation to an organization as unstable as a rebel organization? They are here today, dead tomorrow." The captain chuckled at his little joke. "No, you need a network entrenched firmly in the system, something steady as a rock that one can depend on. That is the proper way for a business venture to blossom." The captain was pacing deliberately, his hands clasped behind his back in a classical philosopher's pose. He spun on his heel toward Manuel as if a most wonderful idea had suddenly burst into his mind. "Hey," he said with a smile of wonderment, "why couldn't the army be the network that you are looking for? Yes, a trusted corps of officers with a network already in place from border to border. What could possibly be better?" And so Manuel's status shot up quickly from a traitorous whore to an official VIP of the Salvadoran Armed Forces. After he'd recovered enough strength to hobble around exploring his environment, he realized that he was in a third-story hotel room right in the city of San Salvador. The hotel room was a nice one at that. In fact, Manuel had never experienced such luxury in his life. He peeked out the door and traded stares with 2 army sentries posted by his door. It was obvious the good captain desired to solidify his business proposal before granting Manuel a full pardon. Over the next few days, Manuel took part in several amicable business conferences with Captain Rodriguez and a few other high-ranking Army officers. It almost made him nauseous to have to deal with the captain, but the only alternative was a shallow, unmarked grave. With that sobering thought, Manuel made up his mind that the captain was tolerable after all. The Army allowed him to place unlimited calls to Acapulco to iron out business details with Juan Carlos. Juan Carlos was ecstatic with the new developments. His organization was already working with the Panamanian and the Guatemalan militaries, so the Salvadoran army was the logical next step. As it turned out, Salvadoran officers stationed close to the Guatemalan border had been engaged in smuggling operations for years with their Guatemalan counterparts. The Salvadoran officers had been mostly trading American-made arms with the Guatemalans, but coca would be just as easy and much lighter to boot. Manuel returned to Acapulco to a hero's welcome from Juan Carlos. Mission accomplished and all that. Of course, the potential payoff for Juan Carlos could be enormous if the Salvadoran connection panned out. Manuel considered himself damn lucky just to be alive. These dope deals were turning out to be risky business indeed. Manuel was still convinced that his future awaited him in the United States. Juan Carlos couldn't agree more and tried to convince Manuel to expand the trafficking business into Los Angeles. Manuel didn't want anything to do with dope running for the moment, not after his near-death experience in the shallow earthen pit in El Salvador. Juan Carlos told Manuel that he completely understood and would still help Manuel reach his dream in Los Angeles. Juan Carlos arranged for a forged passport and some cash for Manuel to start his new life, along with an open invitation to test the U.S. coca market any time. Manuel promised Juan Carlos that he would keep the offer in mind. Privately, he hoped that life in the United States would present enough opportunity from legitimate livelihoods that a trafficking business would not be necessary.